Hello and welcome to a special New Year's episode of Painting Insights podcast. Let me introduce myself for the audience. My name's Simon Renshaw and I am the host of the podcast. Now, we are partway through season 6, so what I thought I would do for the Christmas Eve episode and for this New Year's Eve episode is to share with you a medley of different moments from previous seasons. On the Christmas episode, I did season 3. And for this episode, it's going to be moments from season 4. Now, we're partway through season 6, so we have lots more of amazing guests next year. Guests like Rob Poynton, Pete the Street, Maina Matthias, Pete Monahan, loads of incredible people. So I hope you're looking forward to it and staying tuned. And for this episode, we're going to have some lovely moments from amazing artists. So let's raise a glass and enjoy ourselves for this New Year's Eve special. Cheers.
I like the idea of there's something about sculpture. Whenever you're in the room with the sculpture, whether it's really small or whether it fills the room, it creates an atmosphere, and you have to explore the different surfaces, and you have to, or you can, view it from multiple different angles. And the thing that I always struggled with about paint was that it's a flat surface. And it's a face-on reading. So my challenge then was to create interest and try and make the eye move around the surface. So that's why, often you'll find there's lots of little scratches or little flecks of colour, and that's to hopefully make the eye travel around the surface and actually make it a little bit more dynamic than just a face-on encounter.
I've taught for many, many years, and the good Lord gave me this concept of the 7 foundational truths. The first one is squinting, and squinting is very, very important because it cuts out the knick-knack, paddywhack, all the unnecessary busyness that artists allow to be in their painting. They always have this attitude, well, if I'll put more in, or if I'll make this a little bit better, or do this and that, they end up overdoing it. Painting should fall under the concept of simplicity. Keep it simple, stupid is a great rule for everything in life, and especially in painting. So squinting cuts out the superfluous information that is not necessary for you to have a really strong, wonderfully designed painting. Then comes drawing in the disciplines. That's number 2, but drawing is really very similar to painting in the fact that it's all about, drawing is about relationships, as painting is all about relationships. So it's like, if you look at my eye, where do the ears line up with the eye? There's a relationship, and you can see in this thing, you can see that it's almost straight across. The cracks of the mouth, where do they line up with the eyes? And where does the bottom of the nose hit in relationship to the ears? So drawing is really simple, but people make it so much harder because they're thinking about the end product and trying to arrive at that instead of building it properly. And it's the same problem with painting. Artists are trying to build the painting improperly without laying the foundational design and getting the 2 or 3 value shapes that you need to be the foundation of everything that you're going to put on it. So, but I don't spend a lot of time on drawing, because drawing, you can only paint as well as you can draw. In fact, now the last 3 or 4 years, I don't put any pencil marks. I don't put any paint marks on my paintings or anything. I just paint them. but I know how because it's not my first rodeo. And I've got mileage is everything, and I've got a lot of mileage. Thank the good Lord for that. So you can train your brain to think that way. Sharon McGraw has one of the best draftsmen that we have today, along with Liberace. But she she professes, and it's so true. I took her class in drawing because I knew she knew things that I didn't know, and so you always go to the source. And she taught me that you don't have to measure things. You can train your brain to see those relationships. And that's what you do. And then you're able to draw. And it's the same thing with painting. You need to be able to see relationships of values, relationships of shapes, the negative spaces versus the positive spaces. And it helps you put it all together. So that's drawing. But the most important foundational truth, in my experience, is design. Design rules because if you don't have a great design, your painting is going to circle the drain. It's just not going to happen. And design is really a simple thing. There's two concepts in design in traditional academic painting and in the modernist. In the traditional, the design is have a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary. The primary will end up being the centrality of focus. This is the focus of that painting, and this is what's exploited. And so you learn, I teach my students how to build that centrality of focus. Whether your lightest light, your darkest dark, or the strongest color, or the heaviest painting, of paint manipulation. The Greeks came up with it in architecture, the golden section, the golden rule. And it was always, if you put a tit-tat-toe board and you have the intersecting lines where those lines intersect, and up on the upper right, and I call it station number 2, it was the one that they came up with. But if it works there, it would work in station number 1. It would work down in the lower left in station number 3, or the lower right in station number 4. And those are just starting points to have that centrality of focus. But design is preeminent. It's the most important thing. You can do great with all the other foundational truths, but if you don't have a great design, like I said, it's not going to be up for the Oscars. So the second most important thing, right on the coattails of design, in my opinion, is value. Value will always be the artist's greatest challenge the rest of their lives. It's one thing that you have to take seriously, and I teach the students to have not to buy the black and white value scale at the art stores that have the 10 value range, because you don't see the halftone. The middle on a 10 value scale is between 5 and 6, and you don't see that value. So I figured it out, and I found out later after reading again Richard Smith's book. He had already found that out, and it's really the most accurate way to think in terms of value is a 9 value scale. 5 is your halftone. You've got 4 values on the light side and 4 values then on the other side, on the dark side. And you can train yourself to be able to identify the halftone. I have my students make those, paint those little squares and put it together very smallly. And then they can, when their husband's driving down the freeway or the highway, they can take that scale and have it in their hands, and they can look out at the landscape as they're driving by, and they can say, well, what's the value of that drop shadow from that tree? And then they can guesstimate, and then they can take the value and then hold it up there and check it out. And with all other things, it's a real important foundational truth that artists need to do is you need to really get a hold and understand how to, in the beginning, you'll have to learn how to copy everything. Copy the form. It's a dog, not a cat. It's a human, not a, whatever. So, and it's the same thing with value. You have to train yourself to be able to copy that value. And in my estimation, in all the teaching that I've done, it's always the artist's biggest problem in the class, as they all have problems. And I have to confess too, there's times when I don't get it right, but I realize what's wrong with the painting. It's that I don't have the value relationships correct. You can actually paint a painting and have the different values than you're actually looking at, but they have to be relational in your painting like they're relational in life. And that's another trick that a lot of people don't realize the importance of that. After value is color, and color is very simple too, because color is just the intensity or the lack thereof, the chroma or the monochromatic tone of what that color is. And then the other key thing in with color is when you're going to paint things, why not think about the complementaries? Your green, red, your blue, orange, and your yellow, purple. If you're doing still lives, have a purple vase and then put lemons down on the table so that you've got the yellow and the violet. And then the purple vase, you put more of a yellow ochre, which is out of yellow, on the background behind the purple vase. And then the yellow lemons, you put a purple tablecloth or some form of that. So you have to learn. That's something I learned about 8 years ago, the importance of that. And so why would you paint, why would you not play that? The reason those the yellow, purple, the blue, orange, and the red, green, why wouldn't you not play those up when they're called complementaries? That means those colors complement each other to the hilt. And then the other thing in color that I would like to comment on is that it's really important. Kevin McPherson hired me to paint with his master program in Europe, back in 2005 and 2006. And I was aware of the fact that he just painted, he didn't use the Zorn palette, but he used just the triad color, red, blue, and yellow, the primary colors. And I was always amazed that he could get the color that he got, because I was always under the stupid influence of thinking that the more colors you have on your palette, the greater chance you're going to have to be able to duplicate what you're seeing. And actually, it's the opposite, because if you only have 3 colors to work with, then white, and or you can use black if you want to cut the chroma quicker, but your palette will be so homogenized and work so much better coming out of the 3 colors and the white that you're using, and it'll be more harmoniously. I could look through the the art books and show you examples of where the color harmony is not good, and that's because they have a spot of a rogue thing on their palette that they stuck in, and placed it in there, and it has no relation. Here again, the word relationship, it has no relationships to the other colors. Then comes edges, and I'll never forget, I took Dan Gerhardt's workshop in 1995, and I'd already had an undergraduate degree in fine art, a master's degree in painting and drawing at Long Beach State, and Dan's talking about the edges in his painting, and I thought he was talking about the four perimeters, the edge of the painting. What an idiot, you know. So that showed you what I knew. And so edges are crucial, because the difference in edge work is the good painters do it, I would say, at a mediocre level. The good painters, the ones that are good, but the much better, the greater painters really understand edges and do it much more efficiently, and it really influences the painting and steps it up a huge degree by understanding edges. And then the last one is paint manipulation, and I call it that instead of brushwork, because brushwork is just too limiting. I can remember when I first started painting fine art, and it was a result of I had a 25-year illustration career, and everything I used was a brush. I didn't know how to use a palette knife at all, nor did I care. And but paint manipulation and mark making in that is hugely important, because of the other term that's not in the seven foundational truths, and that's variety and unity. If you have too much unity in any discipline, that becomes boring. If you have too much variety in any of those disciplines, that becomes chaotic. So the key in the formulas is to get as much variety, like in paint manipulation, as you can, but still have the painting unified, still have that unified. So that's the key in that, and that's a key issue, because sometimes if I'm painting outdoors, plein air, and I'm doing, let's say I'm doing the branches of the tree and stuff, instead of using a paintbrush, I'll pick up a twig and take it, because you can't, like, similar to the palette knife, you can only calculate that to a certain degree, and that's the blessing, because that's the problem with us as artists. We're control freaks, and we'll suck the blood out of everything if we get a chance. So I take that twig and dip it in the paint and scratch it up this way, and then maybe load it up again and scratch it over that way. And then you've got the palette knife. I started using Kleenex real early in my fine art career because of a painting that I did that I was so excited to do, and it was absolutely horrible. And I was so distraught, and I was about ready to just really take my knife to the canvas. And I was so angry, and I took my big 1-inch brush, and I just took it, and I went, I wasn't looking. I just did that. I didn't even want to look at the paint. It was so horrible. It was so contrived and controlled. It didn't have any of the quality that I was wanting to have. And I didn't even look at the painting, and I just went back and stood back, and then I came back to, I don't know what I was going to do, but I sat down. Oh, I was going to take it off and just tear up I was going to, it was on stretcher bars, and I was just going to bust through the whole thing. And so I reached over and I looked up and to pick it up, and I looked at it and I went, oh my gosh, that looks great. It was because the spirit of not looking and trying to make marks and messing it all up. I only had to come back with a couple of marks and reconnect a couple of things, and the painting was excellent. And that's what really launched my fine art career. And Satan was right there at the beginning going, you can't call that art. You can't call that art. You're going to make your whole career of messing up paintings. And that's what my career has been. Learning, Whistler says, I build the form and I destroy it. I build it and I destroy it. I build it and I destroy it. The more you take your painting through that, actually, the more beautiful and explosive and interesting and maybe charismatic might be a possible word. I find myself, because I've been painting for so long, I can come to the conclusion of a painting way too soon, and it'll be a fine painting, but I'm not getting better at my craft. I'm just staying in one spot, and then I realize, I really, in the thought process when I'm doing it, it's so important to know I can bring it back, I can fix it, and it'll be much better for it. When I was teaching, one of the things that I would do, I'd have 20 students for a week, and I had two assistants working for me so we could get much more accomplished with the students. And so they would, after I did my lecture, my slideshow to back up the lecture, and then my demo to back up the slideshow and the lecture, then they were to do their first one. And they would do their first painting, and then so all 20 would be done. So I would take my brush and my palette knife and Kleenex, and I'd stand behind the painting with them standing, and I'd ask the class, does this painting need brain surgery? Meaning that it was really a pretty good painting and it just needed, some real smart chess playing. Or is it a truck driver? It means it needs a little bit more than brain surgery. And then there was the bulldozer. And the bulldozer is the one that their painting is so left brain. It is a horrible reproduction of what their subject matter is, and it's so left brain and uncreative and all of that. So I would stand with my brush and look at the students would be all standing behind me, and I'd take my brush and I'd go shh, shh, like that and mess their whole painting, and the lady go, "Oh, don't do it! You're ruining my painting." I didn't say anything about it. I got news for her. Her painting was so homely, and then I would go back and then I would patch it up, and the students were like amazed. I mean, the painting, it had spirit, it had movement, and they would be shocked. And so after doing that 3 times, then the fourth or fifth time, then I'd ask the class, brain surgery, truck driver, or bulldozer, and they all got it right. They could see, based on what I was trying to teach them, how to do it. And I would do it. And then after get through all 20, then they start, before they started their next painting, they would go back, like a bunch of them would go back and patch the painting back up exactly the way it was before we did any messing up, and then run it again. So then I'd have to explain to them that, but that all comes with mileage. And a lot of times the students that I have, which I would rather have, I would rather have students that don't have any mileage at all, are very little, because there's not that deep programming that I have to take them through, because, well, they'd say, my high school teacher told me to do such and such. And I said, well, this is a level we're trying to get at professional painting, and this trumps, what they were telling you, and in my opinion. And so So that's variety and unity, and then I have the alien factor, the pace factor, and the association factor. The alien factor that the Lord showed me to come up with is really crucial because you can have an alien color in your composition, an alien shape, you can have an alien value, or and it could be a shape that is not like anything else in the painting, meaning it's alien to every other form, every other color, every other. But it could be one of those. It doesn't have to be all of those. It could be one of those different situations, and that will draw your attention. So you can have an alien factor in the centrality focus. You could have your lightest light and your darkest dark right next to each other with a hard edge, and based on how long that edge is, you're going to be there because it's white against black. That's what op art was all based on in the 60s and 70s, using triangles and circles and shapes, black and white, and doing that and getting that flash. And they also did it with color, the strongest color of red, the same value next to the same value of the strongest color of green at the same value, and you get a flash in between. When those two meet, you get a flash, and that was the op art in the contemporary market. So the alien factor works that way, and then you can also have an alien factor in the secondary or tertiary area, but much smaller and much not as significant, and that will draw you back to that area too. In Sargent's painting of the three girls on the carpet, and he's got the big white pillared bases on both sides, and then the red screen up over here, and then the one standing next to the wall, she's got two skinny legs that are black like sticks. And so those shapes, there's no other shapes like that in there. So that helps you with her with that white dress and differentiates her from the girls that are sitting down. So that was a crucial thing that I learned, and I think it's very important. So those are concerned with what I call the authorship of painting. Those things are very important to know, because my goal as an instructor is to build a good, strong toolkit for the students so that they can have a checks and balance and be able to evaluate their paintings in not only a scientific way, but I would call it in an appropriate way, So that's kind of that. The association factor is, I learned this from looking at Edward Sago's, British, one of the greatest plein air painters in my estimation in this generation. He had this painting of the Grand Canal in Venice, and he had down in the bottom corner here, he had these two little gondolas with a gondolier and a paddle, and one of the gondoliers, I'm trying to do it with my finger, one of the gondoliers was going that direction, the other one was going a little bit, and they were sort of close to each other, but they were different sizes and different shapes. Well, you knew that was the Grand Canal, and you knew those were boats. So then the one up here, which is much smaller, if you blew that up on a screen, large on the screen with nothing else, you would have no idea what that is. And then all of the little boats that were all up over in here that are really, really small, you wouldn't know what those are. But because you know what these are down here, the association factor, these are boats on that water, and so these are too. So that association factor is crucial in painting because, let's take another example. If you do a bouquet of flowers in a vase, paint one flower with the believability that you want. If you want them to know it's a rose, then make it look enough so that they believe that it's a rose. Then the ones that are secondary around them, you paint them with less detail, and the ones that are in the background, it's just the same color and the same value, and it's just a stroke here and a stroke there. That's the association factor. And what my problem with so many artists is they tell way too much of the story, and then there's that unity and variety factor. They didn't paint the roses with a variety of ways to make it much more exciting and interesting, and it's boring because you look, there's a rose, well, that's painted just like that over here, and this one over here, that's painted just like the main one. The boring factor starts coming in, and that's the difference between great painting and mediocre work. Okay, the face factor is very simple and very explicit. The reason the face factor is an important aspect in painting, especially if you're going to have figures in a painting, in a landscape, depending on how close they are and this and that in the forefront of the painting, the face factor is crucial, because if you don't have the face obscured and it is maybe not even as visible as mine is, or as I'm looking at you, it's going to draw all the attention. It's going to be the centrality of focus, and the reason for that is we spend our whole life we're social creatures. And when I'm looking at you, I'm not looking at your shoes and talking to you. I'm looking at your face. We have relationships with humans. We look at them. We want to see how they respond to what we're talking. We just like to look at faces, and we talk to people. We look at their faces. So it trains us. That's a subconscious thing that happens in art. It's so apparent in art. So when you, like Manet's famous painting of, what's the bartender, or his painting, he's got this lady with a dark little black necklace, which really draws your attention because it's one of the darkest things in the painting. And there's her face, and he's got a still life over here with bottles, fruit, another still life over here, another thing over here, heads and figures in the background and everything. But because the head's large enough, and in that, and you got everything, the kitchen sink thrown in there, you can get away with, if you've got the head large enough, and it will still remain your focus. So that's the face factor.
I just want to take a minute to talk about the patrons for Painting Insights podcast. They are fantastic support for the podcast, the reason it's still going as well. But I also want to mention that every month we post a bonus show to our Patreon channel. And recently I was fortunate enough to spend the day out with Rob Poynton as he painted one of the landscape paintings that he made in North Wales in 2025. And I joined him on a day when it was quite stormy weather. He said it was some of the worst weather conditions he's painted in, and I managed to capture that on camera. It may sound awful, but it was quite a privilege to see how he does what he does in those conditions. If you're interested in that story, that will be exclusive to Patreon, so I highly recommend checking it out. It's the price of a cup of coffee, and it means the world to Richard and I for supporting the podcast. I really genuinely want to thank everyone for watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, but especially to the patrons. They really do prop us up and keep us going. So if you can, check it out. The link will be in the description below.
When I was younger, later on, I sort of found the atelier world and, studied at the Grand Central Atelier where I teach now. But prior to that, I went to a kind of regular art college back in California, the California College of the Arts, and was an illustration major. And so in, studying illustration and then working kind of briefly as an illustrator after school, excuse me, it was all very heavily, kind of photo referencey, right? And I say, when I finished college and, finished studying illustration, I did work, as an illustrator for a little bit. Not super long, actually. It was pretty quick in doing that I kind of decided it wasn't really the thing that I wanted to be doing, and making paintings was really the thing that I was had originally been interested in. And right around that time, I found an atelier, very much by accident, actually, in Oakland. And it was called the Atelier School of Classical Realism. It was run by a guy named David Hardy. It's a really great guy. And that was sort of my introduction to like this atelier world thing, which I had never heard of, prior to that. And I remember I would show him, kind of some of the things I'd be doing, and he would kind of scoff at it a little bit and say like, well, the camera did a lot of the work for you. And I would sort of be like, what do you mean by that? And because to me it was, and I think so many people fall into this category at first, that I think in this point, historically, we almost sort of, if you're any kind of a representational artist, it's almost taken for granted that you're using photos. It's like, well, what else would you be doing almost, right? And that was very much where my head was at the time. And I was kind of like, okay, that's interesting. He's sort of got this, anti-photo thing going on a little bit, right? But we got, I liked him a lot. We got along well. I studied with him for a few years before eventually moving to New York to study at the Grand Central Atelier. But it kind of took me a while to really like fully grasp, the differences between those things. And for quite some time, I was kind of like, well, I don't know. I'm not sure if it really makes that much of a difference, whether you're working from life or a photo, and, and it really was kind of a gradual, almost sort of awakening in a way, to sort of the reality of really the differences between them, right? And I think that in a lot of regards, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that you could kind of come at the difference, but I think, one that, I mean, I think gets maybe used more frequently is, you'll hear people talk about the distortions that a camera gives you, right? That like the colors aren't really what you see in life, that the values aren't really what you see in life, that the shapes aren't even actually really what you see in life, right? And all of that is really true, right? But there's actually, to my mind, I think kind of even maybe deeper reasons that I find it, compelling to work from life, which is that the decision making that you make actually becomes different by necessity, right? And when you look at, say, one of those old like Dutch floral painters that have like 20 million different blooming flowers in the same sort of composition together, right? Well, obviously they weren't doing it from a photograph, right? And you're like, well, wait a second, right? How did they do that, right? How did they make this super, super finished looking thing of a subject that is gone in, a day, right? That moves even throughout the one day, right? Or you look at some, seascape, right? That, you'll see them paint these just amazing ocean waves and stuff, 200 years before the invention of photography, and you're just like, well, they did it somehow, right? Like, how did they do that, right? And I think the understanding, right, and the thought process and the decisiveness, right, that you have to cultivate in order to make that work, to me, is so much of the interesting part of painting, right? And lots of times another example that I'll use is that you can look at a Rubens or like a Franz Snyder's or a Paul DeVos painting, right, of all these animals, and you'll see these like half dozen dogs like fighting with a bear, right? And you're just like, how the heck did he do that, right? And it's like, well, how did he do that, right? Well, like he understood the anatomy of those animals really well, right? They probably watched them, at some way or another in action to see, how they move, how they do these things. They had this great understanding of drawing and how light works against form to make it all, sort of come together and be believable. And I think in so many ways, when we kind of get the camera out and go like, oh man, that's like really hard though. Like, what if I just take a photo and then like paint from that, right? It'll like hold this thing still for me, and then I can kind of copy from that. To me, it's sort of like, well, sorta, right? But like, also it sort of takes like, to me, all the enjoyment, all the discovery, all of the, interest kind of out of that process, right? It sort of sterilizes it in this weird way by sort of sidestepping having to make all those decisions, having to get down to the bottom of all these things, having to get in and sort of contend with like, okay, what do I know and what do I not really know well enough to really pull this off,
Imagine living in a walled city, however large the city is. Every so often, you come to the outer wall, and you're aware that suddenly the road stops here. And I think we all encounter the shape and size of the city wall in our knowledge. We don't always necessarily admit it to ourselves, but we do know when we come to that place and say, I actually don't know. In other words, I'm sometimes talking about things, about a subject, and it's fluff. It's unfounded. So I wonder what lies on the other side of that wall. But I'm too lazy, frankly, to find out. So I kind of started cutting holes in the city wall and extending the streets by reading and studying. And for example, we went to all the top galleries in New York. We made a trip, 2 months, 2 or 3 months actually, studying the galleries in New York, talking to dealers, looking really carefully at what they're showing and why they're showing and what's going on, and abstraction, Franz Klein, Robert Motherwell, Hans Hofmann, talking to the people that represent the estates of those artists. And then we did the same thing in Chicago and Aspen, Colorado, and Santa Fe, New Mexico, and so on. And I'd done a similar thing in New Orleans, Louisiana previously, and so you learn. And the thing is, the learning is not just facts. It's not facts and information. I think facts and information are the very poor cousins of real learning. That's like saying, because I know your name, I know you. Your name is just information. So I can't pretend I know you because I know your name, Simon. And knowing the word color, and knowing red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, means you know a fact. That's all. So from then on, you've got to cut a hole in the city wall and extend streets and begin to open it up and look at Vuillard and Bonnard and Gauguin and, all the early colorists and begin to open it up and build, yeah.
Mm.
I think that's it.
That's incredible. Thank you. Yeah.
It's really fascinating. Isn't it fun? Something I taught my sons was that I have very unusual beliefs about education. So I never allowed them to do homework. That was one thing. Because I think kids have had enough by the time they come home. It's enough. They do about 35 hours in school. Anyone that does a 35-hour job, any adult that does that has had enough. They need to rest and play now, So I believe that. But I also used to, if they got, say, 100% or whatever it was in a test, I used to say, oh, okay. And, show no interest at all. And if they failed at something, I used to kind of rub my hands and say, oh, how interesting. I wonder what it was that confounded you about that thing. Let's have a look. And so what I taught them was that failing is the best thing you can do. Bad marks are just such a blessing because it means there's still some juice in it. What's left? What didn't we get about that? This is really fascinating. So let's look at that. And then they noticed that, when they got good marks, I was just bored because there's no juice left in it. Okay, great. And so therefore, learning and education is completely unconnected to your value as a human being, whether you're good or bad, your value, all of that. There is no connection whatsoever between those two subjects. So I literally obliterated that connection. And so they grew up absolutely loving knowledge and feeling no connection. You see, the truth about it all is that in this universe, you and I know one speck between us of knowledge in an infinite amount of awareness of which we are both completely ignorant. We'll never overcome our ignorance in this life or in any other life. We'll never, So we have to be okay with it.
I agree. I think the best we can hope for is to know enough to know that we don't know very much, really.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We're all just at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Never leave that place. The starter's block in a race, we're still standing on it. It seems to me that at that time, the piano was always in the air. Slow nocturnes late in the night, barely audible behind the library door, and gay little rural pieces through the day. Beethoven mid-evening, of course. No one could tolerate him in the morning. The piano walked our emotions like a groom walking a broodmare. We felt through the conduit of music. And when the rough men, the carters, rolled it up the hall on wheels, shrouded in an army blanket, I stood about with my hands in my pockets, feeling a loud kind of fear. But then it was only me in the old house.
I think whether painting is very thin or very thick, it needs to come across as the right amount. So it's just enough. You can have an area of paint like this, but if it's just achieving, at that point, achieving what needs to be conveyed, you don't want to put any more. People can, any audience member can detect when something is indulgent, even if they can't articulate it, Vermeer is, layers and layers and layers of thin, and then you go, but it's just enough to achieve it. Do you know Frank Auerbach?
Yes.
Yeah. And you look at it and he'll say, God, isn't he wonderful? And he'll say that, people go, how long do your paintings take? He's like, oh, somewhere between, I don't know, 2 hours to 2 years. And he talks about how he'll work on it and work on it and work on it. And then the painting will, he's like, oh, wait, I see it, burst. And you could have that 2 hour painting on top of the 2 year beginnings. And then he says, now I'm done. But it's just enough, even though it's, that thick.
Mm.
It's some spots, right?
Yeah.
I think when I joined a local plein air group, I think probably about that time, about 2012. And I was getting outside and painting and learning how to see color more clearly. So the reason I did that was because I have a teacher here in Middle Tennessee that I love. Dawn Whitelaw is her name. She's quite famous for her portraiture and her plein air work. And I went to her and said, Dawn, how can I become a better portrait artist? And she said, get outside and paint. And I said, what? I think she told me that years before. And I had 3 daughters at home. And I thought, how can I do? I can't just haul them out. And I just couldn't do it. So I ignored that advice for probably 10 years and continued painting tonally. I knew I wanted to be a painter forever, but I hadn't had any real instruction other than books, just getting so many books. And, this was during this time, there was no internet. So I was buying books and just studying them a good bit. And I started teaching myself how to sketch with a brush. And it was so hard for me, Simon. It was so hard to go from that precise little tip to this big stick with, that you can't control. And it was upsetting, and yet I was determined. So I read in books that in art schools, they would teach sketching for about a year, and then they would teach painting only tonally for another year. And so I thought, well, I've been sketching for a long time. I'll just start painting tonally. So I bought burnt umber and raw umber, a warm and a cool. And I just started getting a brush, and that work was mostly figurative work. So I would paint my children, or I would take pictures of someone that might model for me. And I created, tonal figurative paintings and even tonal florals, oddly. But I got into a gallery here in Nashville, and so that was very part-time. It was about a 15-year period where I was just selling tonal paintings, rather large pieces. And I had real good success with that, but I didn't have a clue as to how to manipulate color. I had no idea. And every time I tried, I just completely bombed. So I knew I had to get out there and learn how to mix color. For some reason, it didn't click for me at all. And so a happy happenstance living in Middle Tennessee. I haven't lived here. I guess we moved here in 1996 or so. And there's just this huge painting community in Middle Tennessee. I don't know if you're aware of that or not.
No.
There's great artists that live and teach and work here. Shane Neal is one of my all-time favorite portrait artists. He lives here. Don Whitelaw, who I mentioned before. Anne Blair Brown is a landscape painter. Lori Putnam is an amazing landscape artist. I could just continue. There's so many. And so I've learned from them. They were all members of, well, I don't think Shane was, but they were all members of the Chestnut Group, which is a local plein air painting organization that raises money, fundraises for local, historical sites or museums, or we're sort of trying to keep the beautification of landmarks and parks alive and thriving in Middle Tennessee. So I'm so grateful for that experience. Or, that was a deep dive into learning how to mix color outside. And it was sort of it's just a community that I all of a sudden found myself in. I'm very grateful for that.
Something I really try and look for, actually, especially if I'm doing a landscape rather than a seascape. So where I live, it is really hilly. And you get some really interesting shadow play on a small scale, say tree shadows running up a hill. So you can see all the branches kind of shadowed. I love painting that. That kind of high contrast. For example, if it's snowed or there's frost, the sort of stark blue shadows against the bright sunlit shadows, that's something else that will always kind of catch my eye. On a larger scale, then, so if I was painting a big vista like Dartmoor, it does make it more interesting if you've got some of that relief shown in shadow or cloud shadows racing across the landscape. Yeah. And actually painting that sort of huge landscape, it can be weirdly sort of flat looking if you catch the light wrong and everything's sunlit and there's you can't see the shadows. So it does sort of make it harder. So shadows are actually quite an important part of the things I look for in a landscape.
I've done quite a lot of film photography years ago with very, very old cameras, and they almost felt like they were more in tune with what I wanted to see in a painting than the digital cameras we have now. And I think if you were to gain something from a photo that you don't have outside, it's the details get very pronounced at times. And one of the things as a painter that you should be doing is filtering out certain details in the landscape or whatever, and figuring out what you want to put into the painting and what you don't want to put into the painting. And the trouble with photos is it almost encourages you to put everything in. So I always say it's better to have painted from life and then moved on to painting from photos rather than to paint from photos and then try to paint from life.
I had absolutely no expectations. I mean, we're talking, my understanding of art and education was about as like empty and like at zero as it could be. So I had no expectations. And honestly, if money wasn't a factor, I would have stayed because I loved it so much. I loved being challenged. Honestly, I felt like the driest sponge in the wettest environment. I mean, every word that these teachers were saying to me made sense on another level that I don't know. It was weird how to even explain just how it all made sense to me. And I was like, oh my God, perspective? What is perspective? Oh, you can draw things in space, and which that was like the hardest class. Drawing a staircase or something. Holy shit. Like, not easy, but it made so much sense. And then I had one professor that I really, really admired, and I admired him as a person, but also his paintings, personally. And I just really like leached onto him and his wife, who was actually a painter. And that is when in his class, I understood landscape painting for the first time. And I was like, oh, holy shit, I love this, you know? And now if you went through my Instagram or look at my work at all, landscapes play a pretty big role into what I do.
I paint what I see. I don't embellish. I don't alter. It's a direct reaction and response to that which is before me. So I would actually say it's less than grandiose. It's reality. It's as I see it. Now, when I say reality, obviously my paintings are paintings because, as with everyone, my visual spectrum is limited and I see things that others don't see in a different way, and that comes out. But my attempt is always to capture it exactly as I see it. Now, the limitations I put on it is I'm not trying to create a photograph. I'm not trying to create a perfect rendering. The approach is that I see a color and I see a shape, and that goes down on the canvas. Mistakes happen because I'm totally fallible, as we all are. And the choices that I make are, does that mistake affect the desire of what I wanted to capture? Is it important, or do I accept that mistake as part of the process? So everything is the same in that respect. If I'm painting a cat, I'm not thinking about a cat. If I'm painting a tree, I'm not thinking about a tree. It really is just shapes and colors in the right place, hopefully. And the mistakes happen usually when I'm off in color or slightly off in the drawing. But many times that adds to the excitement of the painting because those mistakes create a movement and an energy that the camera can't capture. Cameras are great. And my wife is a professional photographer, and we travel together and we're drawn to similar imagery and similar scenes. She captures it as it is perfectly, and then I capture it with all my idiosyncrasies.
I'll be looking at things going, oh, I know I can sell that. But my heart has to also really love it. I can't have things here even though it could sell brilliantly, I won't have it unless I believe in it, and I would like to own it myself. Not saying every piece of art I want to own, but on the whole, that particular artist has to, I have to crave after it or feel that I understand it. And but it's interesting because it's not just the artworks, it's the person. Yeah. I have to be able to, I'm representing this person. I've got to deal with them. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And some artists I have very different relationships with all of my artists. Some are really close friends, others aren't so much, but that's the relationship we have. All equally is valid. Yeah. But yeah, it's the types of paintings I love, or sculptures or artworks. There's no sort of limit as long as I understand it and I understand why the artist does it. Yeah. And I can get behind it, and I want to own it myself. Yeah. Yeah. That's how I tend to view paintings. You know, I'm very emotional. That tends to override the head that's much, you know, you should have this person. Yeah. Because they're going to sell. Yeah. I can't always take it, unfortunately, because I think I would make more money. I have some artists that don't sell huge amounts, but they're so good. Yeah. And you've got to give them all space. You've got to promote them, haven't you? And I'm luckily, I do have quite an eclectic taste, and I have quite a commercial taste naturally. So
if I tend to like it on the whole, it does sell.
Yeah.
Which is a bonus.
Well, that is it for the New Year's Eve episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I thought there were some incredible moments from those artists. They're so generous with their time, and it's lovely to revisit. You may have seen or listened to season 4, but to revisit those moments is a real treat, and I just loved it. So I thought I would share it with you as this special occasion, the New Year's Eve episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for all your support, and I will see you again in 2026. Cheers. Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you can support the podcast by leaving a like or a comment down below, that would really be great. But what we'd really like is if you're able to leave a review on the podcast channels, wherever you listen to it or download it, because that helps us get spread around the internet so that more people have access to us and able to see what we're making.
Also, follow us on Instagram, and we'd really appreciate it if you like and engage with our posts. Help get the podcast better known. Thanks for listening.